Welcome to another episode of World of Africa with me, Erik and Njoka. On the show this week, we tell you about the jubilation of Nigerians who have embraced the coup more than a month after the military takeover took place. Plus, a tense polling day where the re-election of a president nicknamed Crocodile was long predicted. More details about those two stories shortly. We begin with the death of Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin and the impact it may have on the continent. Wagner theoretically could still function without Prigozhin. You see, Wagner operatives provide security to autocratic African leaders seeking to stay in power, as well as boots on the ground to fight rebels or extremist groups alongside under-equipped national armies. Besides the Central African Republic, Wagner's launchpad in Africa, Wagner mercenaries are known to be deployed in Libya, Mali and Sudan. For years, questions have swirled around Wagner's ambitions in Africa and where the group might expand next, especially in countries where military officers seized power. So how much of an impact, if any, would a leaderless mercenary group have on the continent? Let's find out in this cover story this week.
Russia has become one of the leading global players, exerting its influence on the continent through aid, economic development, trade, and military cooperation. Moscow's influence on Africa is intertwined with the activities of the mercenary group Wagner in various countries. The group is most active in the Central African Republic, Libya, Mali, and Sudan, all of which have a tenuous relationship with the West due to colonial legacies and inherent political differences. This video went viral days before Moscow claimed that the Wagner boss had died in a plane crash. Yevgeny Prigozhin stamped his group's strength on the continent in his military fatigues as he asserted how he was intent on freeing Africa.
We are working. The temperature is above 50 degrees Celsius, just how we like it. The Wagner group is conducting a reconnaissance and search activities, making Russia even greater on every continent and Africa even freer.
But how widespread is the mercenary group in the continent? Approximately 1,000 Wagner troops entered CAR in 2018 to defend the government of President Faustin Archange Touadera against rebel attacks on the capital Bangui. In return, Wagner subsidiaries received unrestricted logging rights and control of the lucrative Dasima gold mine. Similarly, Wagner forces were deployed to Mozambique in 2019 to help fight the self-proclaimed Islamic State in the northern Cabo Delgado province. However, the group failed to contain the insurgency and withdrew from the area after a few months. In Mali, the armed forces received combat and surveillance aircraft from Moscow. On top of this, reports showed that Mali, one of the poorest countries in the world, was spending $10 million a month on Wagner mercenaries. Wagner also has a significant stake in Mali's oil sector, effectively controlling the price of fossil fuels for export. In some cases, Wagner's involvement in Africa has resulted in alleged human rights violations and exacerbated regional insecurity. In Libya, Wagner troops who fought alongside the Libyan National Army during its 2019 Tripoli campaign have been accused of committing extrajudicial killings and planting landmines in civilian areas. More recently, the group has been reportedly supplying Sudan's Rapid Support Forces militia with missiles during its war against the Sudanese army. Experts believe Russia's ties with the Wagner group in Africa is a win-win, with Wagner benefiting from Russian weapons and Russia having preferential access to Africa's natural resources. Cooperation between the private military and the Russian government occurs, especially where raw materials are abundant, with Wagner controlling the business interests on the continent. Prigozhin's Wagner footprint in Africa was built on blood and treasure. Contracts giving access to valuable resources were made in payment for military support. They provided security and training in exchange for payment in management of mines, oil, and other natural resource endowments. In Niger, analysts think that the impact of Prigozhin's death will not be the same as countries that work together with the Russian mercenaries. Many say nothing will change and that the importance of Wagner in Niger or the Sahel is a question of belief.
The death of Wagner's top man, Prigozhin, is not going to completely reshuffle the cards in Africa, because behind this big company was the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, who had his hand in it. So for me, it's a puzzle. It means that there are elements that aren't there, that have passed away. Perhaps Putin will go on to reorganize the company so as to have exactly the same influence on it, with men he's capable of mastering. Because we mustn't forget that Prigozhin was in the process of taking on a certain scope that was somewhat escaping his master.
The African-led and designed security initiatives are an explicit rejection of mercenaries. But for those military governments in the region, in Mali, Burkina Faso, and now Niger, the Russian operatives may be an attractive alternative. Wagner, if it survives, or other emerging Russian mercenary groups, will increasingly find the market limited to pushist regimes using them as the security partner of last resort. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
He first emerged from the barracks and ventured out to assess the damage on the cities which were severely affected by the fighting in Sudan. He then met with members of the government for the first time since the conflict with the rival general erupted in mid-April, and opted to go meet Egyptian president to brief him about the war in his country. Sudan Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan is a general on a mission. He has so far refused a proposed plan for lasting peace by his former deputy and says there will be no chance of a deal with traitors. Here's a report, the latest from Sudan.
The war in Sudan is unrelenting. Ever since the conflict began, military forces and the paramilitary group have been at each other's throats for months, with their bosses conducting and issuing commands from their bunkers. But that changed on the 24th of August. Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan came out of the barracks for the first time in 4 months. He first visits Omdurman's military camp, where hundreds of soldiers enthusiastically welcome their leader. He barely spends over 10 minutes at this camp. He then rushes to a hospital in the city of Atbara in Nile State, some 300 kilometers northeast of Khartoum. Here too, everything from the niceties to consoling with the patients was done in a huff. It took just a few minutes for the general to be in and out of the facility. The general ended his pleasantries with a tour of Al-Damer, where he met Sudanese citizens who were displaced from the capital Khartoum. Footage of Burhan, who was wearing his army fatigues and his trademark beret, have rarely been released since the fighting erupted in April. But the army posted images showing the general speaking to soldiers with a caption indicating he was at the Wadi Saitna air base north of Khartoum. Another video showed him surrounded by civilians in the capital's twin city of Omdurman, even as residents there reported fighting on the same day of his visit. The raging war between the rival generals has devastated Sudan, already an impoverished nation, and numerous attempts to mediate a ceasefire by the United States and Saudi Arabia have failed. Humanitarian aid groups have long been active in Sudan, where for years millions of Sudanese have relied on them for food and other assistance. As the war has dragged on with no let-up in sight, over half of the country is in need of humanitarian aid. Experts have warned that more than 6 million people face famine.
Now, while it's difficult to establish an exact number of casualties due to the intensity of the fighting and the fact that the remains of many of those killed have not been collected, identified or buried, tentative figures indicate that more than 4,000 people have so far been killed, including hundreds of civilians.
The United Nations also warned that hundreds of thousands of malnourished children could die if they do not receive treatment. Diseases such as measles, malaria, dengue and acute diarrhea are spreading. The army-controlled coastal city of Port Sudan has become a refuge from the war raging to the west. But its health system is in a state of near collapse due to power cuts and scarce supplies, and staff shortages now exacerbated by striking doctors. Doctors and nurses in the Red Sea city say they have not been paid for 4 months as the Sudanese government's budget has been decimated by the fighting.
The citizens also suffer. The marginalized ones, they cannot afford treatment in private hospitals. As you can see, the hospital is full.
The war between Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his former deputy Mohammad Hamdan Daglo, who commands the paramilitary RSF, has been raging since April. It has spread from Khartoum and the western region of Darfur to Kordofan and Jazeera state, killing thousands and forcing millions to flee their homes. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
In Niger, the mutinous soldiers who overthrew democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum announced a raft of measures that analysts say are aimed at strengthening their grip on power while preparing to defend against any military attempt by regional leaders to reinstate Bazoum. It's been 1 month of back and forth between the junta regime and the regional body ECOWAS of a return to civilian rule. But most citizens in the country seem comfortable with their new reality. Here's a report.
This is the Sieni Kontechi Stadium, the largest in Niger with a capacity of 30,000 seats. It was 2/3 full and flags of Niger, Algeria and Russia dotted the stands. Acrobats painted in Niger's national colors put on a show in the center of the pitch. Tens of thousands of people rallied here in support of last month's coup, a day after the new military rulers gave France's ambassador to Niger 48 hours to leave the country.
The French have been asked to leave, but they refused. We are going to defeat those plotting against our country. We are going to defeat them and storm them out. They are asking you to get ready. You mustn't sleep or doze off. They will leave.
Nigerians were marking the 1-month anniversary of the military takeover. Like recent coups in neighboring Burkina Faso and Mali, the military takeover in Niger came at a time amid a growing wave of anti-French sentiment. Ahead of the rally, the junta ordered its armed forces to be on highest alert, citing an increased threat of an attack. The West African bloc ECOWAS has imposed sanctions against the new regime and also threatened to use military means to remove it if the new rulers do not hand back power to Bazoum. Efforts to find a diplomatic solution are on. The generals who ousted President Mohamed Bazoum in July 26 rebellion have now called for a 3-year transition period, while the economic community of West African states, they demand the immediate return to constitutional order. With delegations shuttling into Niamey, ECOWAS says that the negotiations remains its priority, while it prepares a standby mission for a possible legitimate use of force to restore democracy if needed.
Even now, it is not too late for the military authorities in Niger to reconsider their action and listen to the voice of reason, as the regional leaders will not condone coup d'etat.
Meanwhile, the coup seems to have inspired artists in Niger and beyond.
I embraced my artistic career very strongly. Being in the military, I saw that if I made galvanizing songs, I could see my fellow soldiers. They liked them and went along, and that pushed them to go out into the field and fight. I saw that it was really very good.
The threat of a military intervention by West African neighbors has awakened patriotism within a section of the population.
It's a sum of values that artists reflect or sing for the military in the sense that they become so much like a roadmap for the military itself. It means that society can't tolerate it.
The history of the Sahel nation is scarred by a succession of military regimes and coups, which have often brought down unpopular governments. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has been elected to a second term with 52.6% of the vote, and that's according to the Electoral Commission. But the opposition also claimed to have won, saying there was widespread vote rigging, and observers said the vote fell short of democratic standards. Zimbabweans still face high inflation, poverty and a climate of fear. When he first became president, Mnangagwa, known as the Crocodile for his ruthlessness, promised a new start for his country's people. Now all eyes are on how he will steer his country forward after being granted another chance.
Most Zimbabweans were already queuing at the break of dawn. August 23rd was a crucial date in their calendar.
It is my right to vote, so it's important for me to vote.
Despite various cases of delays, the voting went on as planned. Frustration had already started to build up for some voters, but with time it settled down. And just as many were lining up to exercise their right, the main opposition candidate, Nelson Chamisa, made this announcement.
This is a clear case of voter suppression, a classic case of Stone Age, unprecedented, analog rigging.
He was alleging voter rigging, a common factor in every election in this southern African nation. But despite Chamisa's allegations, ballot counting continued in Harare after a day of voting in the country's legislative and presidential elections. The Electoral Commission had to extend the counting hours later. International poll observers have cast doubt on the credibility of the vote.
Ultimately, the elections fell short of many regional and international standards, including key principles of equality, universality, transparency, and accountability.
The counting process continued for the next 2 days as both main parties conducted various press conferences that would end up being disrupted, like this one in Harare by the Citizens Coalition for Change. Or this incident where 41 local monitors of Zimbabwe's elections were arraigned. The men and women from Zimbabwean pro-democracy and pressure groups were arrested in multiple raids, and their computers and mobile phones were seized. And on the night of 26th of August, this announcement was made.
I, Priscilla Makanyara Chigumba, the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, in terms of Section 110, subsection 3, do hereby declare that Mnangagwa Emerson Dambudzo of ZANU-PF Party has received 2,350,711 votes out of 4,468,730 valid votes cast, which are more than half the number of valid votes cast in the presidential election. Therefore, Mnangagwa Emerson Dambudzo of ZANU-PF Party is declared duly elected President of the Republic of Zimbabwe with effect from 26 August 2023.
The elections have come and gone. I'm humbled by the trust and confidence that you, my fellow countrymen and women, have reposed on me to once again serve as president of our great country, Zimbabwe.
We have won this election. We are in the lead. We are even surprised why Mr. Mnangagwa has been declared, the leader, because he's not.
Nicknamed the Crocodile, Mnangagwa first came to power after a coup that deposed the late ruler Robert Mugabe in 2017. A year later, he narrowly beat Chamisa, first time in a vote the opposition leader condemned as fraudulent, and which was followed by a deadly crackdown. As a white-ruled British colony named Rhodesia, the country broke away from London in 1965, gaining independence in 1980 after a long guerrilla war, and was renamed Zimbabwe. But under Robert Mugabe, its first leader, the fledgling democracy spiraled into hardline rule and economic decline, with hyperinflation wiping out savings and deterring investment. The opposition hoped to ride a wave of discontent over corruption, rising prices, unemployment, and entrenched poverty. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And finally, Ashenda is a notable cultural event in Ethiopia's Tigray region, celebrated primarily in late August. The festival sees the participation from young girls and women who engage in communal songs and dances, fostering a sense of community. The women celebrated the festival after a war hiatus. Here now is a report.
In the heart of Ethiopia's capital, a group of women dances while brandishing a flag bearing the insignia of the war-scarred Tigray region. A scene that was unimaginable a year earlier. The festival that they are celebrating honors girls and women.
We didn't celebrate it for a long time because of different problems. But after all of it, we all came back to love and unity and celebrating together.
Women show up for the celebration in traditional embroidered dresses and gold jewelry. The hair twisted into elaborate braids and curls, with beaded headbands across their foreheads, and henna patterns adorning their hands. Originally a Christian festival, marking the end of a 15-day fast commemorating the Assumption of Mary, Ashenda has evolved into a celebration that transcends religion. Its roots lie in the Tigray, but it is also celebrated in the neighboring Amhara region and in Eritrea.
I don't know how to explain my happiness. As you can see, the people are very nice. We better continue like this because there is nothing like peace. I wish peace and love for all Ethiopia, even for the world. We were an example of peace and we need to be the same as before. And that's very interesting.
The two-year conflict that pitted Ethiopia's federal government against the Tigray People's Liberation Front sparked widespread rights abuses, including rapes by both sides, and arbitrary mass detentions of ethnic Tigrayans in Addis Ababa and elsewhere. While the northern region endured a massive humanitarian crisis due to a lack of food, fuel, cash and medicines, Tigrayans living in other parts of Ethiopia were forced to keep a low profile to avoid becoming the targets of ethnic profiling. But the signing of a peace deal last November raised cautious hopes among the community, including festival organizers in the country, that some of their events will go on as planned without a hitch for the first time since 2020. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And it's a wrap on this episode of World of Africa. Do you have a story idea from the continent that you want told on our show? Well, get in touch with us on X or any other social media platform and tell us about it using the hashtag World of Africa. We'd love hearing from you. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'm Erik Njoka. Goodbye for now.